Okay. But since there's just three of us, essentially, we could just start with how the last couple of assignments have gone for each of you. Kelly, do you want to, I kind of want to go alphabetically so that people know if they're going to need to talk soon. Kelly, do you want to go first and then Rupal? Yeah?
Okay, sure. So I'm just to say how this last assignment went?
Yeah, you can see, yeah, you can go talk about the last assignment, or you can reflect on both of them if you want, if they're conjoined at all in your mind.
Oh, well, I thought it was kind of magical how the rad lib, I was like, oh, I just kind of like, tried to fill it in as best I could. I'm like, oh, that actually sounds kind of article-like. So,
Good.
But yeah,
Good.
I guess, yeah, I mean, like I said, in the assignment, I was like, I heard about Acropose, but it was interesting. Like, I was like, wow, I really just assumed, like, obviously this, our project was awesome. And, it was interesting to think, oh, I have to step back and, be more objective about, analyzing it, I guess.
Yeah. I think that there's this thing, and I know that this applies to Rupal's project also, so I'll just expand for a minute. But like you, Rupal, Joanna, Nicole, and Elizabeth are all kind of evaluating an intervention that's folded within an intervention. And so I think that there's this general challenge of, and they're all in spaces where everybody implements them slightly differently. So like yours is related to housing. Hi, we're doing a slow start. I know, aren't they? They were essential for arriving. So like yours is around housing, and I forget, there's one around community health workers. I think that's Nicole's, and then there's another one around EI, and they're all very huge literatures, and the interventions are multi-component. So it becomes quite a challenge to figure out if you think your intervention is strong enough to actually have the desired effect. But given that the literature is very multi-component, how many of the components that do you have and need to have an effect? Someone should mute.
Okay, I'm gonna mute. My kids just came home.
Oh, okay. And then where is the novelty? Like, what can you learn from your particular site that is different and can contribute to the literature? If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Kelly?
Yes, it does. Yeah, I was actually thinking, you had the feedback of focusing on novelty. And one of the things I was thinking about was, I think that I need to look into this more, but I feel like having the legal component embedded in primary care or embedded in the project, that might be kind of novel, and also might be more interesting to look at that more specifically, because that might be something that we're going to continue, possibly. Yeah. So.
Yes, but then it also puts you in the situation that Rupal's also in which it's very difficult to have legal services tied to clinical services. So your intervention ends up being potentially only generalizable to a very small pool of practices. All of these things are trade-offs.
Yeah.
But it's good that you're becoming aware of it being multi-component and how to think of multi-component, both in terms of an intervention and the degree to which you can expect an effect. So then also trying to figure out how it contributes to the literature. Okay. So then we're just going around and saying what worked you know, for folks for the last assignment or reflecting on 2 assignments. And Kelly had said, well, that she really liked the rad lib. Hey, Rupal, do you have something you want to reflect on?
Yeah,
over the last assignment or 2? Yeah.
So, I mean, again, it's really nice to hear that kind of several of us are dealing with somewhat similar issues. And it's hard because we all do live in our own institutions where I mean, for me, it's like what we've been doing here feels unique, yet it feels like it shouldn't be. And so it's hard to separate that attachment to it from that concept of equipoise. And I think what equipoise is meaning for me is also approaching the topic with equanimity and really being able to take a step back and you know, make sure I know what it is that I'm evaluating and really looking at it component by component in a systematic manner. So the rad lib, I also kind of did it the best that I could, but it was really heartening to actually know that I kind of got the idea when with the call for proposals that you sent out, because when I read it, I was like, because it was hard for me not to look at it and think like, well, you know, like to take away from it. What am I trying to say? Because it's the space in which I practice, I was like, of course, there's different screening tools that are used, and so but I had to take a step back and say, well, this question is assuming that there is an efficacy to those screening tools. So and that they have a translatable effect in terms of, you know, outcomes. So it was nice to know. It was nice to know that I was able to interpret some of the issues with that particular question. Where I'm moving forward in reframing my project now is really trying to be systematic in my review of the literature and try to look at all of the different components objectively or as objectively as I can, I'll say.
That's great. Is that Laura, is that you?
Yes, I'm CH120762.
CH1022.
It's like my alias.
Would you like alias. So then I don't know who 207035 is, but why don't you go next? We're just going around the room and reflecting on the assignment 1 or assignment 2.
Yeah, no, as I told you in my email to you, I was struggling with the rad lib, although I also enjoyed it because it made me really think about what I want to accomplish. And what it made me understand was that I think that I'm actually trying to assess a few different things, and that's why it's hard for me to clarify in my mind what my outcome is, because I guess I have a few different outcomes. So that was helpful to me. And so now it's kind of a matter of focusing. I guess I get impatient because there are many questions that I want to answer at the same time. And so I always get impatient when I have to slow down and answer one question at a time, because I always want to kind of jump to making an intervention. And so when I have to kind of take steps back and really assess what is the appropriate intervention to make, it's just kind of it's a good thing for me to kind of like go through that process.
Actually, so Laura's issue that she's alluding to, that we had an email conversation, is very similar. Deanna's in the room, and is very similar to what I think is happening for you as well, where you have a main predictor and a main outcome, then you have all these other variables, and you're like, how do these relate to each other?
Right.
So would you
Sure.
like to go next?
Yeah, I was nodding along with like a lot of the things that were just said. I feel like the nice thing about the rad lib is it does kind of help you hone your question, but then I felt like I got a little confused with my exposures and like the confounding and, you know, thinking of a conceptual model, I could imagine the arrows just kind of going in so many different directions. So it's kind of hard to piece out like, exactly what the question is for like this study and like what other information I need for other studies or something like that. That's kind of what I was struggling with.
So, we're going to do methods today, which is going to be bigger picture than conceptual model and how domains and variables relate to one another, but it should help organize it.
Okay.
And so what I had said to Deanna on my email exchange with her is like, if you sit with a napkin and a pen and you had to draw boxes and arrows, which one, I mean, you were forced to pick a primary predictor and a primary outcome, but what are the relationships between the other boxes? And when you force yourself to choose what's primary, I mean, you probably have an idea in your head based on the literature you've read, but then when you put it down on paper and you do what Rupal's describing, where she's done a major literature review, but now she's going back and making sure that the relationships are in the direction that she expects them to, that there's something that supports it. So it's grounded both in what you observe, like you're observing the relationships in real life, right? And you're like, wait, they can go both directions, right? Exactly. But that's what helps stage it a little bit.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I wasn't sure for any of you if you've ever been exposed to DAG diagrams. I forget what they stand for.
So I very briefly, yes.
Okay. So, but if you imagine that there's one box for your predictors, your main predictor, and then one box for your main outcome. Confounding is its own box where you think it has just relationship to either your primary and your outcome, your predictor, both your predictor and your outcome. And so you stick in everything that you think messes up that primary relationship into that box. Okay? But so for both you and Laura, you actually have additional boxes outside of confounding. I think for Laura, there's something, if the primary outcome predictor and the outcome have a relationship, Laura's worried about, okay, what's the relationship after that? That's what's happening to you, Laura. For you, I think you have other, like, I think that this relationship goes through these other variables to get to the outcome.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I thought the exercise went great. Oh, yes, one more person. Hey, how's it going, Nicole?
Sorry, I was trying to let it cut out.
Yeah, it's okay. I was just going to switch to next week's assignment. Do you want to chime in on how the last assignment or the last two assignments went for you?
Sure. I think I heard a little bit of what people were saying, but
yeah.
I think in general it was just a good lesson and sort of hard for me generally because I do find myself, I think it was Laura who was saying, like, wanting to jump to the intervention and like having a sense already in my mind of like, okay, probably if I do this, then the results will be this, and I want there to be this outcome. So I think it was good to sort of have that frame of like, no, you have to take a step back and really try to be as objective as possible.
Yeah.
Which is hard for me.
Yeah.
But important.
Okay, good. Well, I thought it was so striking that everybody nailed the question. So when it wasn't about you and it wasn't about your project, everybody knew what to do. But I thought it was fascinating that at least for a third of people, when they went on to their own, when they wrote out their thing, it did not have the same equipoise. So it's super hard to be, I don't know. I think it's very hard to be unbiased. But I do think that if you shift your biases and you incorporate you insist on being evidence-based, you start to have hypotheses instead of biases. So some evidence-based reasoning for why you think it's going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. Okay. I'm going to shift gears for the last 15 minutes. Any other parting shots? Yeah, okay, good. Let me just get this up. Can you guys see the slides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
If Google nods, I'm assuming it's okay because I can't see anybody else. Oh, that's good. But I have the Oh, yeah, because
For the recording.
So smart. Gosh, what would I do without you? All right, so this is the way I think of assignment 1 with the QI versus research. That, to me, was just a double check that you actually want to be doing research as opposed to QI. There's no judgment which thing you want to do, but like just make sure that you're looking at it from a research perspective, because otherwise you get the two mixed up and it's just schizophrenic. So that is just a perspective check. And then the second one, the equipoise, I felt like is your sort of your body habitus. Like, what's your posture on this issue? And your hands are open and you have a nice wide stance. Okay. All right. But so now this next assignment is a bit meatier. And I also think that there's 3 concepts in it, and you have to hold them in your head as you proceed. And it helps you fill out that middle, the next section of the rad lib, which is all methods. And I think that is very difficult the first time you're doing it. So let me just walk you through a 3D diagram that I made that I hold in my head all the time. And it's just constant touch points, like, am I doing this? Am I doing that? How am I doing this? And these things trade off on one another. In real life, it's hard to get, you'll see, in the upper right back corner. All right, so study rigor is the quality of the research process. It has 3 components in my mind. It's the study design, it's how generalizable your findings are going to be, and then how novel is it? Like, is this really different? And I know that we go around all the time and people say this hasn't been done before. I'm asking us to not just ask that question. Was it not done because it doesn't matter and it's not important and it's not new? Or is it novel and important? So that's what we're looking for. And I feel like the first 2, well, I think people realize that they need study design. I think they forget about generalizability, and novelty isn't, like, everything's so new that you think that it's novel, but you really have to go through your lit search and really convince yourself and the audience that this is truly novel. Okay, in general, the more rigorous the study, the more trustworthy and worthwhile the findings, as a general rule. Okay, so the first dimension I think you'll be familiar with. Hey, Kelly, I don't know who needs to mute. Someone needs to mute. Yes, that's better, thank you. So this goes back to med school, you know, like when you have to do an evidence-based review, and it generally is that case study, so it's like 1 or 5 observations, is generally considered the weakest study design, because maybe it's just those 5 observations, people, clinics, whatever. And then, but if you get a series of them and you accumulate them over time so that everything's a little bit more volume, or you see them across multiple settings, that becomes stronger. When you can see something before and after, that again notches you up in terms of study design. And then you become longitudinal, where you have multiple observations of the same thing. I can't tell if you, Deanna, your study is longitudinal or not.
It's cross-sectional right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as we're working our way towards the gold standard, which is a randomized controlled study design, it is, you know, in the classic clinical model, it'll be double-blinded. This is very difficult to achieve in health services research, so it's pretty hard to get to a randomized trial, but it can be done. And then between longitudinal and randomized, it's pretty easy to get case comparisons if you work for it. So like RuPaul is evaluating something that's happening in her practice, but she's going to go look at other practices and try and match patients across that. That makes it better, because then you're like, wait, whatever I observed where I am is something that's happening generally. Okay. And then there's quasi-experimental, which is super fancy, case comparison, where you use all these different techniques to increase how rigorously you're actually comparing your cases with your comparisons. Okay. All right, so that's axis number one. All right, then have you guys seen this? I feel like okay. So low generalizability is general. It's like who else can this apply to? That's the concept. And then you have to ask yourself, like, usually if you're just doing a single site, there's so many things that are specific to a single site or a single person that you cannot be that sure that it's going to apply to somebody else or some situation next. So in kind of a population level, I just arrayed this according to single site. Sometimes we get regional samples. You have more than one practice site, Deanna, so that's really helpful for spreading out some of your observations. Like if you're seeing it across 2 or 3 sites, maybe it's a thing.
Right.
Yeah. National sample just means that you drew even more broadly, but it doesn't necessarily match the population at large. So nationally representative is usually as good as we can get. In general, there's a trade-off. Oh, so that's 2D plane. Wait, where's my? Yeah, okay. So in general, so far in research world, there's a classic trade-off between study design, high rigor, and generalizability being high. So I think you've probably seen all these articles where they're like clinical trials are so specific about who they want that their findings stop being generalizable to even like by gender. That's like half the population, right? Like we study all white males, so it's only applicable to men. And now we know that women present with heart attacks different than men. And so all those studies that were done before don't necessarily apply to a very large group. And then at the same time, by the same token, when you have something that's very broad and applies to a lot of people, it's hard to get a trial. It's really hard to enroll that many people into whatever intervention you want. So there is a natural trade-off between the two. Okay. So this is, I just emptied the box because I'm going to add a third dimension here. And so now on the z-axis, you can see there's a novelty bar that goes from low to high, high being sort of at the back of the room and low being at the front of the room. And this is where you have to ask yourself, and I think you're all doing it, is does what I'm doing fill a knowledge gap? Which knowledge gap is it? Is it multiple knowledge gaps? Nicole, yours is the community health worker one, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a huge, fuzzy literature. But very variable. Yes, very variable. But like, is there some niche area that is different? Like, is pediatrics different from adults? Or knowing what the content of what the community health worker is doing, is that different from all the other trials or something like that? Yeah. So when I sent you that JAMA article, yeah, that's okay. But that one's so interesting to me because that one was so specific around using community health workers to explain iron deficiency anemia. It was like very specific around the condition, whereas I think in general you kind of don't know what the community health worker, you just added a personnel and you don't, they help address any number of issues. So you're also going to have this, I mean, I think all of you have this issue.
Ours was sort of more like the setting of being in a patient-centered medical home was a little bit different than like the way some other people, like there was like an epilepsy community health worker and like an epilepsy clinic, which is just like chronic disease management versus like doing more of this like resource coordination support, but it is still like very.
Right, so you'll have to decide if maybe the literature separates into condition-specific community health workers versus, you know, condition agnostic, and there's almost like care coordinators.
Right, and that's sort of what we're looking at, like care coordinators, and then what is their role? Yeah, and then even though they called it something different, the function is the same, so you have to enroll. Right, and that's hard too. Yeah, in the literature they call it all kinds of
Yeah. You said something that reminds me of Rupal's project, which is thinking that the patient-centered medical home is a unique context.
Mhm.
To me, patient-centered medical home is a movement that occurred over the last decade. So there's been a secular trend towards everyone becoming more like a patient-centered medical home, and there's many ways to have measured that. So it's another place where you're like, is that actually unique?
Mhm.
I don't necessarily think that that would be.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea and the question needs to be novel. And now I'm talking hardcore research, like you're applying for a grant. Your methods need to be innovative in some way. And sometimes your data set needs to be innovative. And that's how you rack up the points in terms of novelty. I would not sweat the methods for right now. You guys are all doing your first projects. So the only thing I would want you to think about from a novelty perspective is, does it fill a knowledge gap, and how are my implications important? Okay. So this is what I mean. When you're designing your project, aim up and towards the right rear. like if your head was a box, like a 3D box, right? You'd be like up in the corner. All right. All right. I put this in the slide deck, the sort of rubric, and then and you guys, I know that it's so wordy, but you have it, and just try and stick to it. It's not that you can't have other words. I'm just saying these are the words, or this is the information that is necessary for your method section, at the minimum. Yeah? Mm-hmm. The other thing that I've really noticed when people are starting to write their abstract, usually everybody writes long. I haven't met anyone yet who writes too short, but there's not a lot of room in 250 words. So there's just just color in the line. Like, make it easy on yourself, try and fill in the blanks, and then move on. So I provided two different examples for filling out this section. The first one is a quantitative example. So, and this, I actually just pulled this from Camilla's abstract last year. She was looking at the relationship between racial ethnic discrimination and depressive symptoms. We analyzed longitudinally collected, so you know the structure of the data for 4297 students, their breakout, because race matters here, who participated in survey administrations in 5th, 7th, and 10th grade. Racial ethnic discrimination, depressive symptoms were surveyed at each time point. Okay, so that's all like general study design, right? Longitudinally collected. How did you get to your primary, and then the next sentence is, what is your primary predictor? Racial ethnic discrimination, and then we have, and your main outcome, depressive symptoms. And then more detail, technical detail on both of those, and then your analytical model. Qualitative example, this is from my own work. Actually, none of you are doing qualitative. What? You don't know what I'm doing yet. Okay. Well, you have a qualitative example if you want, if people want. Yeah? All right. We have ending on time. So assignment number 3, you just have to think about your study idea. You have to, again, have an outer body experience and judge yourself on how rigorous your study is, your study design is. Ask yourself who your study results are going to be generalizable to, and then ask yourself how novel is your question. And then all I want you to do is draw a circle for me in the box about what quadrant you think your project is living in. It's totally legit to have something in the left lower front quadrant. but you just need to know it. And you need to know when you go out and try and present that it has this limitation. And then you coach it and frame it properly. That's totally okay. It's when you have, you know, your claims do not match your study design that it becomes a problem. And then try and finish the fourth section of the research Mad Lib. I think this is probably going to take a little bit longer than the other assignments, but it's okay because we're just going to go over this again in February. Yeah, and between February and now, you'll have 2 different opportunities to refine. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. That's it. I can take questions. Yeah? Any questions? Good? Overwhelmed? Got this?
All is well.
All is well.
Ready to try.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alina.
Yep, talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.